We now move to the second session, and we start off with the strategic perspective with Josephine Glaudemans from BCI in Holland, who will really help us explain what it is that people really need to think about in evaluating their options. Over to you, Josephine.
I think I'm the only one really not a British person today speaking, so I have more an international perspective, working in the Netherlands and really helping companies finding globally what's the best solution. And before I start talking about criteria, which is really the topic for today, let me start with some definitions. Because in the world I live in, the international location selection consultancy world, the onshore, nearshore, and offshore discussion is quite vague sometimes. So let me just give some definitions. Onshore typically is in the main home market, but tends to be lower cost. Nearshore is a lower cost location near the main market, but not in the same country. And offshore is really going somewhere further off in a different time zone and in a complete different country for sure. So north shoring is typically a UK-based term. So we don't see north shoring anywhere else in the world. And north shoring is actually a limited geographical description of onshoring, I would say. In order to talk about the criteria, so the strategies that we see a lot of firms taking is, on the one hand, the further you go out of your own country, typically the bigger the cost efficiency are. Those are mainly realized by labor arbitrage, but we also heard earlier from Paul from BDO that also real estate plays a role. So by going further away from your home base, you can get those cost efficiency. But at the same time, the further you go, you get other issues. So languages, time zone, cultural and physical connectivity and affinity is lost. So we see a lot of companies really trying to find the right balance between, on the one hand, having cost efficiencies, and on the other hand, still having that language, time zone, cultural and physical affinity. So when we speak about the key drivers that we have a lot in our projects, when we look at onshore, nearshore, offshore solutions, I can share with you the top 15, and probably not all of them, but the top 15 factors that are often given to us by stakeholders if we do stakeholder interviews in the beginning. And in general, it all is about labor quality, labor availability, technical skills, communication skills, language skills, acceptable language, because, do you need near native languages or native, or is fluency enough? Of course, it has to do with the educated labor pool. It has to do with staff loyalty, the competition on the local labor market, the loyalty of people that you can have and expect, but also the flexibility of local labor markets. Then, of course, it's as I said, the labor costs that are mentioned again, operating costs, telecom, flying in and out, real estate, all of those factors, the training and recruiting of staff. Then there's, of course, the time zone proximity, accessibility, but also security of data and the right of privilege is quite relevant for many of the nearshore and offshore solutions. Of course, the reliable IT infrastructure and latency is quite critical to the current data centers. And then it's more about the business environment, the quality of life. Can you recruit international or just locally? What's the bureaucracy, the ease of doing business in a new location? What's the cultural alignment? And what's the natural disaster, the political, the financial risk? The political stability in many countries could be a factor as well. And last but not least, there's, of course, things like corporate income tax and tax holidays that could be available. So in our way of working with clients, we say that everything that you can calculate with in cost, you keep separate. Everything that has more to do with the quality of the environment and the quality of staff, that's a second one. And then a third factor tends to be everything that is risk related. The local risk, political risk, financial risk, all of those. And of course, if you talk about north shoring, it's more onshoring. It means that you have much lower risk because you have a cultural affinity, the market, ease of doing business is similar. It's just that you go there because you want to have the native language skills and still have a cost saving. So I think that typically generalizes everything that we do for our clients in just 5 minutes. So I'll leave it with that.
Thank you very much, Josephine. That was a real whistle-top tour. Well, within your on the dot of 5 minutes, really impressive. So thank you very, very much. And thank you for joining us from Holland today, which was awesome. The next area Josephine mentioned was that the number one area was labor, talent, if you like. So I'm delighted that Graham Lucas from Page Group, who is the Managing Director North in Page Group, and leads a team of 170 people across the North. And then James Chaplin, who is the founder and chief executive of VacancySoft, who has some really interesting trend data. So Graham, I believe you're kicking off. Over to you, sir.
I've been with the business for about 17 years, the last 10 years of which I've been supporting North Shoring projects specifically, which has been a great thing to be involved in. I think it's fair to say over those 10 years, the volume and frequency of North Shoring projects has increased exponentially. It's a growing trend that we've seen. And I think if we jump back 5 or 6 years, one of the more common things for businesses to be doing, if we're sticking with legal businesses, which we obviously talked about a lot, it was either pools of paralegals or it was a back office function that was being moved. And whilst that's still very prevalent, what we've certainly seen is a much greater trend for all sectors. So not just professional services, but every sector, there's North Shoring activity underway, and much more significant breadth of the job functions and the job levels where we've seen North Shoring activity. James, I know we had the briefest of conversations earlier on, but I think maybe your business has seen kind of evidence within your data that supports that trend.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. And I think, Richard gave me a brief and he said, okay, please can you assemble some data which shows what has been happening specifically within professional services when it comes to hiring by, in terms of the law firms, the accounting firms, and how their hiring has actually changed. And picking up on what Graham said, I mean, we've been tracking these markets since 2006. And so in 2006, yes, obviously, what you would see is that you started to see a shift where in the first instance, it started to be about the low cost areas, your paralegals, your more office secretarial roles, those areas, business administration functions, and those were shifted. And then what's really interesting is that it started to shift right the way through the piece. And so just to give you some data on this, just looking at what we did, we pulled together the data on the last 3 years. So 2017 to 2019, because what we saw was a real watermark moment post-referendum, where the firms actually just made the jump and said, actually, we're just going to start equalizing hiring. And what I mean by that is they were turning around and saying, well, actually, regardless of whether there are more jobs or less jobs, the proportion of jobs that we're going to be moving to these locations is going to increase. So we're going to push more legal roles here, more finance roles here, right the way through, regardless of whether it's qualified lawyers, accountants, whether it's management roles or administration roles. And so, I mean, to give you an idea, if you're looking at the Northwest specifically, the vacancies for qualified accountants has increased from, say, 11.8% in 2018 through to 13.3%. If you're looking at the legal, in terms of the legal side, it's actually increased from, say, 11% in 2017 through to 12% now. So what we're seeing is the number of these qualified roles in London is shrinking proportionately, whilst it's increasing in the Northwest. Now, if the market expands, obviously the number of jobs in London is growing, but then the number of jobs growing in the Northwest is growing faster. And there's some actually, and Graham, you would know this as well, I think just to let you finish it off, what you've seen with that is you have seen the salary differential narrow. And I'll push back to you now and let you talk about that one.
Yeah, for sure. And what I wanted to do was maybe to try and sign off was just to try and give 3 relatively practical bits of advice. So we've been involved in projects where it's been a handful of people up to where it's been 1,000. And I think probably the 3 things that I would try and challenge people who are either already undertaking it, trying to go further, or considering it. And the first one of those, James will be pleased that I'm saying this, but it's around doing your homework and doing your research. And there's some amazing data out there. There's also a great community in the North where people have shown today, people are happy to talk, people are happy to share experiences, people are happy to meet and have coffee. I think if you combine those meetings with some real strong data, it really is about doing your homework. The plans that we've been involved in, it's normally the 6th, 7th or 8th iteration of a company's plan that ends up being the one that they go live on. So I think really do your homework. The 3 things you want to be thinking of when you're doing your homework really when it comes to talent is availability, accessibility and affordability. And if you get that right, more often than not, you can take the right plan forward. So the second piece is really what's your story? I think one of the things that some of the firms that have struggled in that move, struggled in terms of probably it taking longer than they wanted to get it right, is they've not thought long and hard about what that story is. And I think some of the pulls for why people move jobs in different parts of the country do differ. And I think what you can't do is take that for granted. You've got to really connect with that local labour market. And I think it's typically more competitive than firms realise before they step into it. And the third one is just around agility. And I think no matter how great your data is, no matter how strong your plan is, you've got to be prepared to adjust, particularly for some of the more specialist and niche roles. A really good example of an investment banking firm where we did some work for them last year, and they were looking for something very specific in the north of England. And in the end, they ended up hiring a different combination of 5 people, but also moved more work to that team than they envisaged, but had to make that adjustment based on who they were meeting in the marketplace, albeit they got a great result in the end.
Well, thank you very much, Graham and James. And as I said, number one was talent. When I was talking to Midas, who we worked with very closely on this particular summit, they were kind of saying, well, actually, there's another area that people focus on, which is deals. And I said, what do you mean? Well, actually, they don't want to set up factories. They actually want to set up deals. So delighted to welcome Damien Mohammed from who's the investment director of GC Angels, was based in London, now based locally in the Manchester area, but covering the north, who's talking a bit about what are some of the deals that a firm that is based locally moves to the north. What sort of deals might they find themselves helping with or working with?
Yeah, so as Richard mentioned, I actually I am a personal North Shorer. Spent 13 years in London working with investments and overseas investors. And actually what I found when I moved up to the north is that there's a huge amount of opportunity and talent through the innovation hubs, through Manchester Science Park, through the science parks across the northwest, as well as the great universities that we have in the northwest. But actually the access to funding was actually quite difficult and quite difficult for people to actually access. And what there wasn't, which there was in London, was the angel networks weren't as mature as they were in London. The VCs weren't as active as they were in London. So what we've really tried to do and push as part of GC Angels is kind of collaborate a little bit more with companies that are trying to get the investment. And we've built actually an investor portal for GC Angels to allow institutional investors and also angel investors to come together to understand what opportunities are out across the northwest. So what we've recently done actually is we've been doing live pitch events across the northwest for attracting talent and companies and investment from not just the UK but from overseas. So what you'll find now in the northwest is that you're getting these great companies that are now getting access to talent and investment opportunities across the northwest. One of the things that we're working at the moment is actually a number of regional funds. So what I've not found in London is actually there's things like the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund, there's the Greater Manchester Investment Fund, and there's regional funds available to businesses that are working. So for professional services companies, there's a great opportunity to collaborate with investment partners for financial services, but also to work with the companies themselves to support them, because often the very early stage businesses that we work with don't often have the accountancy firms to work with, the law firms to work with, and they've always struggled with that. You'll probably hear later on from Midas, but we work very closely with Midas in attracting new businesses into Manchester, not just from London, but from overseas as well. And we're helping them support and get the funding that's actually accessible for them. And we're also working very closely with people like Innovate UK, who are offering grant funding for businesses across the northwest. We have partners such as DSW Ventures, so Dow Schofield Watts. They launched an angel network, which is a managed syndicate, and they've been doing fantastically well up in the north. We work in collaboration with people like North Invest, which are based over in Leeds. So it's not just a very small city focus. Actually, it's the whole of the north coming together and collaborating on one, driving forwards for the innovation and the funding for those businesses. Another thing as well is the British Business Bank have launched, you may have seen, regional angel investment scheme. So they're actually able to help us invest with public funding to support angel investment across the northwest, and this is not available within London. So again, giving access to businesses, funding, for early stage businesses and also a little bit further stage businesses as well. So what we're really able to do is whenever a business is looking to North Shore, and whether the professional services or any type of tech business, because we have the access to talent, it actually unlocks some public investment, which also goes coinciding with some of the private and VC investment that we're seeing across the Northwest. And then the final thing really is just to say that we are really seeing a massive drive of businesses that were usually focusing on London, as maybe because fintech was strong there because of the financial services, etc. But we're seeing now that, yes, they may have a sales and marketing team based in London, but actually a lot of the development and tech teams are based up here. And as soon as you have a presence here, it allows you to then unlock the funding available, not just from the public sector, but the private sector too. So the angel investors, people like ourselves, were able to invest into businesses across Greater Manchester, and unlocking them and allowing them to really grow their business across the Northwest. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien. I think a lot of people are just unaware of that whole ecosystem and the extent to which, therefore, there is considerable work for the professional advisors involved in the deals that emerge. And
absolutely,
it's something which people normally think about talent deals. And the third one is technology. And I'm really sorry today, but unfortunately, Sarah Tulip, who was going to be joining us, has unfortunately gone down with something. We hope it's not COVID, but anyway, she's really not at all well. So I'm afraid that particular slot isn't going to happen today, but I am delighted now to welcome Professor Raquel Ortega-Ardillas, I probably pronounced that correctly, who is the chair in Regional Economic Development at the University of Birmingham. So Raquel, she focuses on all sorts of things: productivity, innovation, regional development, SMEs, and entrepreneurship. And the idea to cover all of those in 5 minutes is completely unrealistic. But I know from your sort of economic geography perspective that there are some interesting trends that you've been commenting on in both your excellent blogs and other areas. So really interested to hear what your thoughts are on productivity and the extent when somebody says, "Ah, yes, but the North isn't productive." How would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for inviting me today. And the first thing I wanted to use to comment on is the measurement of productivity. When we are measuring productivity, and also in the last years, we have somehow evolved a bit more on the understanding on how productivity is somehow taking place in different places. And we have to think about on a more multidimensional kind of concept, in particular when we are talking about productivity in services. So leaving a bit aside GBA sometimes and looking at other things, such as, for instance, the big influence that might have the managerial processes or the decision making in making services sector in areas that maybe they are not as let's say dynamic as urban areas, maybe in peripheral areas or areas that are less connected than the center of the country. What we have looked at, looking at productivity today and looking at performance, we have seen that the main differences between the North and the South, they were connected with factors related with some of them we have been discussing today, about the skills and talent, about also the wage distribution. So for instance, we know that there is a wage premium for the areas in around London, but also some other areas related with connectivity and connectedness and the interdependencies between these two concepts. So thinking about also access to finance, as we were saying, and also access to multinationals, also attracting international investment is also very important because of the big spillovers that those companies might have in the place where they are located. We have also mention the role of culture and the business culture as well. It can be very connected with identities and nationalisms. But we have also taken a bit or tackle a bit the role of path dependency and evolutionary approaches. So areas that are more entrepreneurial, we have seen because of the international literature that areas that were more entrepreneurial even in the medieval times with agricultural developments, they are more entrepreneurial nowadays as well. So there is a huge entrepreneurial culture also connected to places. So these are more or less current trends, let's say, on explaining productivity differences. But if we think about the long term, and I have to say that the big elephant in the room is that COVID and Brexit. You know, we know that COVID and Brexit, they have affected places differently. And we know that, in particular, Brexit is going to affect the most productive sectors. Therefore, the combination between COVID and Brexit is going to also create more, if any, big divides in the country, in the productivity, and also in other areas. So we know that COVID and no deal Brexit have different negative consequences in some sectors, or some sectors seem to be more affected than others because of, value change disruptions have affected our sectors differently because of lockdowns and because also travel restrictions, but also because of activities that cannot really be done at home. So we might be seeing long-term productivity as link between challenges like the potential spatial concentration of activities because there is more finance because of trying to reduce the risk of investing in some areas, or because of also we have maybe skill mismatches because COVID is affecting differently different workers, or because we have job polarization because Brexit might eventually affect several kind of sectors that are more in the, let's say, in the intermediate part of the income distribution. But we have opportunities as well. And we have seen that COVID in particular has strengthened some of the trends. So for instance, diversification patterns, many firms have diversified into other areas. Also, all the technology and the digital era, somehow in part in SMEs, it have been putting pressure for them to just somehow move into a more digital work, and then somehow this might help the productivity in the future as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Raquel. It's really good to have that. I like the way the business schools can really look at those overall trends and really kind of get a much clearer insight. So thank you very much for that. That's really good. And I really encourage you to look at the City Ready blogs. They're really, really good stuff. Okay, so we're now, as I mentioned, unfortunately, Sarah is unable to join us today. But we are delighted that Steve Dobson is joining us from Overbury. And the thinking behind that one is that once you have kind of decided what you want to do, then you then need to think about, well, what sort of space do I need and how am I going to use it? And Steve is an absolute expert in that area, so I'm looking forward to your words.
Thanks very much, Richard. Yeah, an interesting topic at an interesting time, I think. I think we're all aware that the world of work is changing and potentially significantly for some. There's been a wave of agile working prior to the recent pandemic. We've understood that people need to be more people-centric space to get the best out of them. And that wave has spread, certainly in the legal sector, out of London, where a lot of the legal firms that have adopted a more agile approach to work, that's now spreading through the country, and even locally here in Manchester, we're now seeing the legal sector adopt some more agile working elements, slightly slower than other sectors potentially, but legal are adopting that more agile approach, which is only going to come to the fore, as I said, once we come through the pandemic and what we're learning through at the moment. So you're absolutely right, Richard. Space, it's important. We've got to factor in people as well. For us as interior design and refurbishment company, one size doesn't fit all. It'd be very easy for us if that was the case. But each business, even in the legal sector, has got its own way of working, its own culture, and its own intricacies that we need to understand and absorb. And I think just going back a couple of sessions there, Graham and James were talking about really doing some homework and understanding what you've got, and doing your research prior is really what we're all about. Before we design any space, anyone, we really need to understand the key building blocks to put together before we put pen to paper. So understanding you, your space, your people, your culture, and your technology, which is equally important these days. All of those elements we need to understand and know intimately before we can then start designing something in a space that's going to work. We have many a toolkit to really understand. Particularly, we've developed that a lot more in the last 12 months, essentially, to really focus on people and start looking at personality traits. And I've done some work in that area to really understand the impact of personality traits in a business and the impact that has on the workplace. What does that mean for individual work settings? What works best for some personalities compared to others? So we really want to build up a real catalogue of knowledge, a real data bank of knowledge that can help us create the right design, and also help you as clients understand and make the right decisions based on that knowledge. That knowledge will help you make better decisions going forward for your space and your people. So looking at people, looking at space, how that's all going to work together, what it actually is you need in a space. Our role is to certainly challenge some of the preconceptions and set ideas. As I said, things are looking very different. We know that one-to-one desking is underutilized and inefficient use of space. We've also now got the factor of people have understood the benefits, or the majority of people have understood the benefits of working from home, potentially, and what that can give, and the impact that that's going to have on people in the office as we switch from a model of going to the office because we want to or we need to, rather than because we have to. So what does that mean for you and your business, and the impact on your spatial requirements there, to essentially come up with a detailed space budget. That space budget, going down to finite detail in terms of meeting rooms and sizes, to desks and alternative work settings away from the desk, the kind of things you need to absorb into. That we then produce test fits. So if you're looking at various different spaces, we can produce test fits to look at what works and what doesn't work in particular buildings, give recommendations around some of the best options in terms of for you as a business as to what works in which individual space, and bring that to life by visualizations and space planning those spaces to give you a real idea of what your space could be, and show you the art of the possible and the differences between potentially what you've got now to what you've got, what you could potentially have in the future. So it's a really exciting time, I think, in our industry, and also for businesses that are looking to change at the moment, whether that's location, they're kind of inbuilt at the same time, to really absorb some of those new ways of working that we're beginning to see evolve.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was really interesting. As I said, a lot of people kind of think, oh, we're going to do all of that, and then they forget about that really important element, which is, well, at the end of the day, it's people, and it's a workplace, and it's ways of serving clients. And if you don't get that core bit right, then people won't want to come and work for you, or the ones you've got will rather go and work elsewhere. So it's pretty fundamental to get that bit right. So thank you very much.
It's huge.
It's